feeling negative about the world can lead to actual physical versus mental disease. Judging women as not being as intelligent. We are all different around different people.
False assumptions are everywhere, shaping how we think and make decisions, often without us even realizing it. Steve, as a clinical psychologist, what are the most common false assumptions that you see people make?
So 99.9% of every client I've ever seen for the last 25 years has the same false assumption. And that is that the person sees themselves as less valuable, less worthy, less capable, just less than others. Often they'll say things like, I just never thought I fit in, I didn't feel capable, I felt I wasn't able to keep up, etc. and so forth. And the reason we know it's a false assumption is because we know there's no standard. There's no ideal person. In fact, we know how dangerous an idea that has been, that there's some ideal. We know that back in World War II and before that, there were groups of people that thought they were superior to others and they tried to take over. So it's not only the most common issue that I see in clients that come to see me, it's all over the literature, and it is probably one of the most dangerous ideas, that there are people that are better than others, that therefore there are people that are less than others. We all have strengths, we all have limitations, and that's by virtue of our design, by virtue of our development.
I mean, we all grow up with certain labels. For example, in my family, I'm always the funny one and the clumsy one. And I feel as though I still find myself making choices based on those ideas. But when I question those labels, it's not so clear.
So labeling is a way to give us categories or ways to identify, and quite often people ask a question like, oh, where's that accent from? Or, oh, where is your background? Or ways that we categorize each other often lead us into false assumptions. And those false assumptions are that, well, this group of people acts a certain way, and we know for a fact that everyone like this is like that. And we hear a lot of derogatory comments that way. And this is where obviously bigotry and racism and all of these ideas, sort of come from, and quite often based on gender. Well, because I'm a female, or because I'm a male. It's been identified or observed that culturally a lot of women of certain generations younger than myself were lowering their voice to be more credible. And I think that may reflect a perception that they may have of society judging women as not being as intelligent or not being as capable. And therefore they had to change the quality of their voice.
So I definitely find that I have a work mode and a friend mode, and when I'm with my partner or my family. How do I ascertain which of these modes are most authentic to my true self?
There was a famous psychoanalyst, Robert Stolorow, that wrote about intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is the fact that people influence each other, and therefore we are necessarily different around different sorts of people. We behave differently, and I think that's normal. So I don't think we have to feel like we should be exactly the same around everyone all the time. In terms of just you trying to be different intentionally, if you're thinking about it, if you're strategizing about it, that might, again, lead you down kind of a false path, because you're not really just being in yourself. You're thinking too much about how you're being perceived, as opposed to accepting who you are and saying, essentially, well, if somebody doesn't like me, so what? I can't be liked by everyone, and I don't love everyone either. It's okay not to be liked by everybody.
So when we take these labels as fact, we can almost see every setback as proof that the label's true. It's almost like I look for a confirmation. How does this type of labeling shape our perception of cause and effect? why does that lead us into false assumptions of our own?
It's called confirmation bias. You're cherry picking your evidence to support your foundational assumption. So if you think you are a person that makes lots of mistakes, that person would then only look at those examples of mistakes and ignore every time that they don't make a mistake. And they just stack up all the negative evidence, and that supports the fundamental underlying assumption that they have about themselves. So they're constantly reinforcing their belief that they are not capable.
I feel as though when I am thinking about making all of these mistakes, I'm looking into the future and how that choice may impact me short term, long term. And I know that for me, it feels like looking at that worst case scenario helps me lower my expectations a little bit. Do you think that there's a positive side to assuming the worst, or is it mostly counterproductive?
So I think the famous quote is Benjamin Franklin touted being a pessimist was the best strategy in life because you're never disappointed, and when you are, it's a pleasant surprise. If your goal is to be pleasantly surprised, as Benjamin Franklin said, then that's a different goal than being accurate. So something closer to what actually is likely to happen is probably the best way to go, I would think, because you're doing kind of a statistical, or what we call a Bayesian approach to looking at the probability of the future based on the past. But if you're using false assumptions from the past, then you're going to keep making the wrong prediction for the future. So the idea is to be accurate, not to try to emphasize positive versus negative. If you're accurate, then you're achieving your goal, which is to know more likely than not what's going to happen next. That's adaptation. That's what living organisms are striving to do to survive. So that's being adaptive.
When you're living in this pessimistic view, what does that do to your brain and your stress levels?
Well, it depends on your reactivity to pessimism. Being an emotion is a physiological condition. So stress hormones would be higher. You would then have related physical diseases that can develop, autoimmune diseases as they predict. We don't understand that well how these things work, but there is indication that feeling negative about the world, feeling negative about yourself can lead to actual physical versus what they call mental disease. The way you see physical reality, the way you perceive it, is entirely within the construct of your mind. Regardless of whether the chair is there or not, your perception of the chair is all you can experience.
So perception really is everything.
Perception is almost everything. There actually is a chair there, and if you bump into it, it will hurt.
Okay. I promise I'll be very careful with the chair. So I definitely find when I'm having a hard run of luck, it's very easy to get stuck in that black and white thinking and expecting the worst. With introspection, is there a best way to practice? Are there exercises or strategies that I can use to get myself out of that rut and start expecting better things?
Well, the only strategy I can think of that seems to work every time is to just say, okay, I'm upset. Recognize that first. Feel it in your body. Know that you're having that experience. Try to use that emotional state to lead you to whatever it is that you're thinking or perceiving or expecting that's driving that emotional state. Then that gives you the object of attention to then evaluate. Is it 100% true what you're thinking? Is it absolutely the case here? Or is it just that you're having a thought, having an expectation, having a perception that's driving an emotional state, which quite often, by the way, we can enjoy negative emotional states. Sometimes it feels good to get angry, outraged, righteous indignation about this or that. But then we kind of sober up from that emotional high and realize, okay, I've indulged myself in a thought process. that was somewhat enjoyable, mostly not, didn't really serve any purpose, wasn't that productive, didn't get me anywhere, didn't solve any problems. So now maybe I could think more carefully, more balanced, and get to where I want to be, because that's got the long-term benefit that I'm really looking for in life.
I feel as though when I'm having those big emotions and they last for a lot longer than I'd like them to, it turns into a mood. Do you think people hold on to these moods long enough for it to become a temperament?
Temperament, mood, depending on how you view it. Temperament maybe is something that we're born with. Maybe temperament is something that is just there. Or maybe it's something we develop. Who knows? I'm not going to claim to know the answer to that. A mood, though, in my understanding of it, is a longer-term emotional state that can last for days, weeks, months, or longer. And in that sense, it is a question of maybe falling into a well, sort of if you were in a landscape or, kind of falling into a hole, you need to kind of come out of that hole, crawl out of that. We can get stuck, I think, in emotional states because we get in this feedback loop. Again, similar to choosing our evidence, being biased, confirming our point of view, and then staying in that mood. So it does take work to begin to challenge the assumptions, to crawl our way out of that valley or that hole and get out of that mood, so to speak. But obviously that happens. It's something that we need to pay attention to. And when your emotional awareness is high enough, you can step outside yourself, you can see yourself being in a mood, and then you can say, okay, do I really want to be in this mood? It's making me miserable, it's making other people miserable. I have a choice. I don't have to be stuck in here. I don't have to do this.
I have a friend that went through a really rough breakup, and I find that with her being bitter through her breakup, it tended to bleed into other areas of her life. Is that bitterness now an assumption she's made through all aspects of her life, or is it her own personality?
So again, it's either or a situation I don't think necessarily exists. I would sort of try to transcend that and say the neuroscience of being in an emotional state for a long period of time that's fed by, let's say, a traumatizing or upsetting event. Again, it's a feedback loop. So it's a physiological phenomenon that's going on. The person is reacting to something that happened. It's then pointed to a certain construct of the way they're now seeing themselves and other people and themselves in the world. And therefore, it leads to feeding back that same information over and over, which accentuates and increases that emotional state's intensity to the point where now they start using that as a theory about the way the world is. So it can start expanding out and generalizing. So instead of just seeing, certain people are horrible to other people and I gotten into a relationship with this certain person, it becomes all people of the same gender, all men, for example, or it could be all relationships or all people. Everyone's a bad person and everyone's going to mistreat me. And then, gosh, my whole life has been just a series of mistreatments and the universe is against me. And human beings have that capability of seeing patterns and then trying to see relationships between things that may actually not exist. So it's illusion as opposed to reality.
Based on neuroscience and the new biological findings that have happened in recent years, what practices or strategies can we have to help us challenge these limiting thoughts?
Well, I think when we talk about neuroscience, we're really talking about getting back to biology, that human beings are alive, they're not machines, but we do process information. So we're taking information from inside and outside, and we are using that information to then adapt better, to do better. Well, if we are, again, getting a false picture, that is leading us to then maladapt. So the idea from neuroscience and even traditional psychology is that we want to adapt better. So the neuroscience of it is that the information needs to be more accurate for us to be able to react in the most advantageous way, both internally and externally. That's why NURI and the neurocog system is reality testing, a good way to pay attention to, first of all, how we're responding to the environment, and use that as sort of our compass to lead us to where that false information may be and try to correct that. So that's the neuroscience behind trying to approach things that are leading us astray.
That was Dr. Stephen Wolfson on The Good Shift. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We hope you found it insightful. Don't forget you can listen to more episodes on YouTube and Spotify. For extra tips and updates, follow us on Instagram and TikTok to learn more about the NURI app. Download the app to access exercises that enhance your emotional awareness and help you make better decisions aligned with your life goals. See you next time.